let's talk about Defending Your Life, a movie that is almost precisely 30 years old right now.
Same.
Well, there you go.
I was weirdly excited when you messaged me this because I was like, oh, 1991, nice. I was like, I don't know how that makes me excited, but sure.
Well, I was 14 when I saw this movie, so I don't know. It makes me feel really old to say that this came out 3 decades ago, because in a lot of ways, I felt like I just saw this on a double feature with a Sylvester Stallone comedy called Oscar at the Dollar Theater somewhere in like Naperville back then. And I was like, I'm a freewheeling teenager. I'm never going to go old. And now here I am talking about a movie where a guy dies when he's 44 years old, same age as me. So it's coming full circle in many ways.
This is too meta. We're getting away. We're like, what are we, an episode of Community?
Oh, there's a show I need to fully catch up on. But no,
I think you will like it. I'm confident.
No, I was a big fan of Community.
Oh yeah, you've mentioned you watched it a little bit before.
I think I dropped off in the last season or two. How many seasons were there of Community?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it gets complicated. Because
they had the writer's strike and all that other
seasons 1 through 3 are phenomenal. And then they fired Dan Harmon for very good reason.
That's what it was.
And then he made an apology for the actions he had committed. And it was actually a pretty good one if you're interested in that kind of the whole Hollywood and the Me Too movement. Like, he was the person the person who was his victim said this is a masterclass in how to apologize. It was it's pretty interesting to read. Not that absolves him of any guilt, but it was super interesting. Anyway, he left the show and then they brought him back for 5, which was a good season, but then the cast started to hemorrhage members. And then 6 was bought by Yahoo in an attempt to make Yahoo screen a thing. And it was still fun and it had some of the bones of Community, but like you could tell that the show was a dead show walking.
God, I barely remember that Yahoo being a thing. Wow.
It was so odd. They started dropping F-bombs just because they could. Of course. But they did it in such a way that it was like, heavy-handed, like we know we're doing this on purpose type thing. And the storytelling was still Community. It was just like, once you lose Troy and Pierce, even though Chevy Chase is a complete and utter douche. And
allegedly. No.
And I can't remember her name. Yvonne. Oh, I can't remember her last name. She plays Shirley, who's just a phenomenal actress.
Yvette Nicole Brown, yeah.
Yvette Nicole Brown, that's it, yeah. She's phenomenal, but she left to take care of a family member. So it's just like, when the show starts losing its core cast, you can't rebuild every season when you're losing another cast member every season. So
right.
But anyway, we're here not to talk about Community, but about.
I feel like we are. No,
I would talk about Community all day, every day. I think it's a fascinating case study in how networks can ruin a series.
And unfortunately, there are so many series that we could talk about. But watching Defending Your Life again last night, I've only seen this movie a handful of times, but it's one of my favorites. I was reminded of another NBC sitcom, The Good Place.
Damn it! You already took my first note.
Well, you can have this one because I watched like the first 2 episodes of The Good Place when it came out years ago, and I was like, it's cute, but I never went back to it. A few months ago, we decided we're going to watch The Good Place because it's all out. It's all in one place. We can watch it. And we watched the first 2 episodes. We're like, this is amazing. And then we haven't gone back to it. So it did remind me of this whole idea of when you die, there is a place that you go to that sort of resembles the life that you left behind. But there's judgment, there's kind of policy and politics. It's fascinating to see how Albert Brooks's movie from 30 years ago sort of rippling ahead through time to pop culture. I'm surprised there aren't more movies kind of in that, or TV shows telling that same kind of story. But what's your thoughts on The Good Place and how it relates to Defending Your Life?
Oh, well, my main note, I actually started taking notes while I was watching this, and then I got really into the movie, so I kind of stopped writing stuff down because I wanted to enjoy it. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. I really, really liked it. But my main kind of overarching thought was I really like when media grapples with the afterlife, but in a way that doesn't take itself so seriously. And I think that this and The Good Place are 2 almost perfect examples of it, where it's just like you're recreating humanity in this weird way. And it's like they have bathrooms in this purgatory afterlife, but you obviously you wouldn't need them based on this stuff. But there's all sorts of things we can dive into later what I like about this and The Good Place is it doesn't take it too seriously. It kind of knows that it's just like imagining something that you can't possibly know whether it exists at all or what it's like, if it does. So it's this very playful look. And I also like that they circumvent like certain tropes that I've found, especially in books and other media about the afterlife, which is like person dies, is angry that they're dead and tries to reverse it. And I say this because I'm reading a book. It's an advanced copy. The book isn't out yet, but it's called Under the Whispering Door. And it's by an author whose book that came out last year is Perfect 10, one of my favorites ever. And this is a different book where this gentleman dies and he goes to like a purgatory and he starts to develop feelings for the ferryman who's supposed to bring him into the beyond or whatever. But this guy is in life is just a reprehensible dude. He's not a friendly guy. He's just like a lawyer who hates everybody and fires all of his employees. And the second he dies, he's just like, I don't want to be dead. Get me back. Get me back. And it's like, I've seen this before. I've heard this before. And that's not to say you can't use that trope as a jumping off point into something different, which I'm confident this will do. But what I really loved about Defending Your Life was the second he dies, he's kind of as if he's kind of sedated. And everybody is. And it's made very clear early on that they're doing this on purpose. But it's like, way to think ahead and circumvent the tropes that would make this movie boring. And it's funny, by making the character more boring in that moment, it makes the movie more exciting because you're like, what exactly are they doing? What powers do they have? And then just kind of generally in the whole media zeitgeist, I think that exploring the afterlife and kind of quote unquote purpose or what makes a worthy human being is really popular right now. And I think it's partially because of our political landscape and just kind of where we are as humanity. We have no idea what the fuck is happening. If you look at movies like Soul, Defending Your Life, or even shows like The Good Place, now is a really good time for that sort of exploration if you approach it from an interesting angle. And for that reason, I really appreciated this movie, and I found it relevant in a way that few movies from 30 years ago would feel.
Very well said. As I mentioned, I haven't watched this movie very much, but it's one of those things where I come across it every, probably 5-10 years or so. And watching it this time as, a person who's the same age roughly as the main character, because when I was 14, I couldn't relate to a guy who was in his mid 40s, but now I kind of can. I'm not, a Los Angeles advertising executive, but we should probably set this up. Albert Brooks, who wrote and directed the movie and stars in it, plays Daniel Miller, who's an exec who gets a BMW, buys himself a BMW for his birthday. He's speeding along in traffic like a complete asshole. He reaches over to pick up one of the, I love the flashback to, I was thinking about this out of the context of this movie a few days ago. I'm like, remember when CDs, do you remember CDs? But also, do you remember when CDs used to come in these really tall cardboard boxes? There was like twice the height of the jewel case inside. Yep. We see that here in the 1991 reality. He leans over to get something that fell in his car and he gets hit by a bus, or he runs into a bus with his car. I'm thinking about all the different possibilities and the ideas that this movie kind of teases, but doesn't really explore. In the afterlife, he meets a woman named Julia, played by Meryl Streep. She died when she was at a friend's house with her family. She slipped and fell in a pool, hit her head and drowned, essentially. And she left behind 2 young kids, like a 7 and a 9-year-old, son and daughter. And the first time I saw this, I'm like, oh, that's, kind of sad or whatever, but she's on a date now. She's kind of like a light, happy experience. Plus they say that the people, when they go to this Judgment City, as it's called, they are cosmically brain wiped or emotion wiped so that they don't go obsessing over the life they left behind, which is a cool detail. But then I started thinking about what's going on back on Earth, because her family's not going to get over this tragedy probably until the day that they die. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of weird stuff going on that you could just mine forever. Like, I'm surprised that we don't meet the people that were on the bus when Daniel hit it with his car. Were there any fatalities from that? You could have a whole entire movie about like, someone else is on trial for their life and then they see Daniel driving his car at their head. I don't know, but you're right. what sets this movie apart from a lot of comedies and a lot of other sort of light, broad entertainment is how well thought out it is. Albert Brooks sat down and created an entire mythology and a society that could function in the afterlife that speaks to what's going on down here, so to speak. And it's also really funny and moving in parts.
It is. It's what I like about this as a quote unquote comedy is that the comedy is kind of embedded within the world. It's not like, well, we'll probably talk about this later for reasons of headcanon, but it's not like a dodgeball, for example, where it's just like the jokes, the movie exists as a vehicle for the jokes, right? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's refreshing to watch a movie that's the comedy comes from the situation in which the characters find themselves. And it's the jokes feel like a natural extension of the world. And the characters, like Albert Brooks's character, feels extraordinarily real to me and relatable. And I think part of that stems from the writing, and part of it stems from his chemistry with Meryl Streep and just whoever else he interacts with. It's hard to see an actress like Meryl Streep on screen and not think that's Meryl Streep, which of course I did, the first second she comes on screen. But then from that point on, she was Julia to me. And their interactions and their little banter feels very genuine. The moment in the comedy club is funny because he's kind of flipping the script on the comedian. He's becoming a heckler who's funnier. So all these little moments are just funny because it feels true to what the movie is trying to do, rather than, oh, here's a joke opportunity, we have to make one. And that in that way, it also reminds me of The Good Place, which I wanted to mention earlier. You definitely should watch the whole series. It's phenomenal. It feels in a way like a spiritual successor to this, because what The Good Place does is it takes this kind of afterlife idea, this system, and it explores how it works, why it works the way it does, and how the characters can change it, which is really remarkable. So you kind of mentioned how you wanted a little more of what happened on Earth. The Good Place goes what happens beyond the purgatory, or the limbo, if you will. And I originally thought I kind of want that from this movie, but then I thought, well, I get that in The Good Place. And this movie is a deep dive into the before, I suppose, if that's what you want to call it. But like I said, it's the comedy is an extension of the world that is created here, and the world building is phenomenal. It feels logically cogent, and even though there are moments where you can be like, would that really be a thing? Would that really be a thing? It's like Albert Brooks just convinces you of everything. And I feel kind of okay just letting him drive. I trust him. That's how I felt in this movie. And it feels weird to say, but I was just in. I was in for the ride. I was like, yep, buckle up, take me wherever. And it felt great.
Did you recognize him at all from seeing him in Taxi Driver last month?
I did not even a little bit. The one that really nagged at my head was Rip Torn, because number one, I think that's a great name because it's both the present and the future tense or past tense of the same word as a first and last name. But also, I was like, I recognize him and I'm pretty sure he's Patches O'Houlihan, but I don't. And I was like, I don't know for sure. So I looked it up, and then of course my head was like, well, he said he went on Earth 6 times. One of those has to be Patches O'Houlihan, probably his last stint on Earth. But anyway, that's getting into some really weird meta shit per usual.
Well, it's also, I can't remember if he was, I think his character was Z. He was the guy in Men in Black who was kind of running the organization.
I have not seen it.
You've never seen Men in Black?
No, I tried to watch it when I was really young and got scared, so I turned it off.
Well, I think it's having an anniversary next year, so we'll definitely put that on the late screening slate. But no, he plays the head of this organization that, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones are fighting aliens and stuff, and he's kind of the guy. Not dissimilar to what he's doing here. I mean, he doesn't run the organization, but he's sort of the person to explain everything that's going on and guide the character, aka the audience, through this whole weird experience. And he's a really nuanced character because you can tell he wants to do the best for his client. Now, continuing the setup, because there are people who might be watching this who haven't seen the film. I don't know why you've gotten this far, but for those who need to know.
They're like, is this a podcast about NBC comedies?
Yes. But Daniel is dead. And in order to determine what happens next, he has to go through a 5-day trial or actually 4 days, because the one day is just him recuperating from having been killed, in which there are 9 days pulled from his life where there's a prosecutor and a defender talking, asking him to defend his choices, talk about how he has overcome his fear, specifically in this case, in order to prove that he's worthy of evolving in the next life or just being sent back to Earth to kind of redo it over again. The idea is humans, I guess, according to this film, and it sounds scientific, so why not, but use between 3 and 5% of their brains, whereas the people in Judgment City use between like 46 and 54% of their brains. They're all super smart and super geniuses, and they eat weird things because that's what you do when you're, super intelligence. But so he's got to review these little movies from his life. But in defending him against a prosecutor who is, I have her name written down because she was great, Lena Foster playing Lee Grant playing Lena Foster, who's the prosecutor. Rip Torn's character, Bob Diamond, who
sounds like a strip club owner.
Yes. It also sounds like, he would own the Diamond Strip Club, and his name's Bob Diamond, of course.
Exactly, right?
Right. But
not the Bob Strip Club, though. That's Diamond Bob.
I don't like where any of this is going. No. But he, in another context, and I think with a dumber writer, he would have been sort of crooked. You can see specifically towards the end of the film when he's getting desperate because it's clear that Daniel has not overcome the fear that he exhibited in his life, but Bob is still tasked with defending him. He's coming up with all these excuses and justifications for these really cowardly actions, but you don't get the sense that he's doing it out of a sleazeball kind of a mode. He's just doing the best that he can because that's what he's cosmically there to do. And I really appreciated that nuance, because I'm sitting there watching thinking, I shouldn't like this guy right now, but I really do.
It's also just inherently funny to me how much I like him, because the idea that the afterlife is and how you go through it is governed by lawyer analogs is hilarious, because in any other movie, like you said, lawyers are just the dickheads, right? They're the bad people. And it's just funny that they're the end all be all for these folks. And, I want to know where the hierarchy comes from, because if you go on Earth X amount of times, becoming a defendant for Earthlings, how good were you in your lifetimes to become this lawyer? And is there something above that you're striving to? And in that way, is the afterlife just a second, like a sequel to Earth? I know this is a really weird question, but that's kind of like the lore of the whole movie is really intriguing. But on the one hand, I really kind of appreciate that they don't dive into it, because it allows you, like I said earlier, to just accept everything at face value and be like, yep, they've got trams. It's basically a corporate resort and you can do whatever you want.
Well, and that's one of the ideas that are sort of behind the curtain of this movie, because if you stop and think that, Daniel and presumably Julie and the other people are not on trial for the totality of their lives, but for a specific thing that they were put back on Earth at one point to solve. So theoretically, Daniel Miller could have been, 3 lives ago, he could have been a serial killer.
Or how to make the perfect risotto.
Yeah, well, there you go. But now he's there specifically to, it doesn't matter all the bad things he did in his life. He's being tried based on his lack of courage. So if you think about this, maybe the higher levels of being, say like a Bob Diamond type, maybe he's just really happy and he doesn't aspire to anything, because it's like, well, I'm being productive. He never sleeps. He eats this glop, which he thinks is delicious. He seems to really enjoy what he's doing. So perhaps that's part of letting go of ego over the however many times that he's been to Earth and other planets and realities beyond. Didn't he say that at one point he didn't show up for work, and the next day Daniel's like, "Where did you go?" And he said, "You wouldn't understand." And he's like, "Try me." He said, "No, you literally wouldn't understand." And he said, just tell me where you were. And he said, I was at the I was at the intersection of fault, or the intersection of thought. I couldn't quite make it out.
Yeah, it was something like that.
Yeah. He's like, "I don't understand."
Yeah. Albert Brooks is, his performance in this one is really remarkable to me, because he's got this sort of pithy humor that could be perceived as someone kind of being mean, or like sarcastic leaning, trending towards mean. But for whatever reason, you get the sense in his delivery that it's all good spirited. And I think the characters surrounding him realize that. And did he direct the movie and write it? Is this, so, I mean, this is, I think that makes it even more, all the more remarkable, because it's just like, he's creating this character who could very well be read as kind of this sharp, mean person, but who's really a good spirit and who wants to make people laugh with these kind of observations on life. And that's also part of the reason I think why his chemistry with Julia works so well, because I don't necessarily think she in life had somebody like that or realized that that was an option. You don't really get a ton of story other than that she saved a cat from a fire, which, like, good on you. I would do the same
and her
thing.
kids. She saved her kids from the fire too.
The kids seem to be already outside, so I don't know if they saved themselves and were like, "You got to get the cat. We don't. You die on the way." But that's it's fun to watch. He makes the character so relatable. It's just interesting to see somebody who can just make these little quick sarcastic jokes and have this sharp wit, but also have such a heart to him, even though you don't really see most of that through the storytelling of the movie. It's Julia that brings that out in him.
Yeah. And, you know, this is something else that as I've gotten older, I've really been conflicted with, because this whole idea of fear, and it's not fear of like jumping in front of, you know, a little lady protector from a mugger or something like that. It's the little things of being afraid to, you know, invest in the wrong things, because he had a chance to, you know, get in early on Casio stock, which would have made him a multi-millionaire. You know, afraid to, even towards the end of this, go to bed with Julia, because he was feeling insecure. He's making up all these excuses for himself. You know, as you get older and you realize that life can be just a series of little compromises that eventually back you into a corner where you don't have as many options because of many reasons, but also just running out of time. Like, I'm not going to be a 20-year-old, you know, TikTok sensation. You know, I'm more than twice that age now. But this idea of taking the moment to really figure out what you believe in and what you're willing to fight for, and just wonder cosmically, like, what do I have to lose? Which is a lesson that he comes to a little bit too late in the story, but it ends up working out for him because he finally does stand up for what he wants. In that final moment where he's decided, he sees Julia in this tram because they're diverging. I know I'm spoiling the entire thing, but he's been sentenced to go back to Earth because, again, he's been proven to be a coward. She, of course, has lived this model, almost one-dimensional life, but she's so sweet, and Meryl Streep is such a good actress, you don't really question it. But she's going on to, you know, a higher plane. At the very last moment, he jumps out of his tram and runs across an electrified like runway, essentially, to pry the doors open and be with the woman that he loves. I got really stirred up in that moment because I really wanted him to succeed. And I felt that I really felt him breaking free of his own insecurities and his own ego in that moment. And that's an emotion I don't really feel watching a whole lot of films.
Yeah, this definitely made me feel something. And I think, to kind of ladder on what you said, I like that it shows all these compromises he makes, or these decisions he makes that may not have been the most courageous, right? But that moment kind of renders those all in a different light, because he's experiencing all these kind of drawbacks in life, or perceived drawbacks based on what the lawyers are showing him, because he didn't do that, he didn't do this. But then at the end of the movie, to me, it's about making the right decision at the right time, not making all the right decisions. That's what courage is, right? It's, oh, I didn't in this. I made a decision that I thought was right at the time. If it's out of fear, I understand that. But, you know, overcoming his fear to find love is different than overcoming his fear of losing $10,000 by not investing in Casio. It's prioritizing those things within your mind and deciding what works for you as a man. And it's kind of wonderful to see that arc play out as he realizes throughout the movie, yeah, I did these crappy things and made all these crappy decisions on Earth, or at least they're telling me those crappy, but look where it got me, right? I made this decision at this time, and now I'm the winner. Now I'm the hero of my story. And I really like the message, because number one, I didn't expect them to quote unquote end up together. But it gave us a little bit of an ambiguous ending by not showing us where they go to. But it's just a pleasure to watch him you see Albert Brooks being told, these are all the wrong things you did. But at the right time, he makes the one right decision, and that changes everything for him. And that's a good lesson to take from it. And if you think back to one of the movies I was comparing to, Soul, I think that movie's message is completely muddled. And I barely understood it. I don't know how a kid could understand, oh, your passion doesn't have to be your job, but also it should be if you can make it your job. But if it's not, that's okay. You just might be unhappy for the rest of your life. And I'm like, that's how Soul felt. And I still liked the movie, but I was like, where are you going with this, Pixar? In this movie, that moment defines the entire arc. And it's like, I now know what they were going for, at least through my interpretation. And I felt like I didn't look uplifted because I was laying supine on the couch with my cat on my chest and his hair all over me. But in my head, I felt very uplifted because I was like, this character who I've been rooting for, but didn't really realize I was rooting for, got what he deserved, which was overcoming his fear at the turning point. And it's just a wonderful ending. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It doesn't ask more questions than it answers. And it just, it kind of gives you that gooey feeling inside, even if you're an emotionless robot like me.
Well, a few things. One, you're right. I did like the way that this movie ended with them going away together, because it's not established that they end up together, but it might just be for that few seconds as they drive off into the light. Because
like
it's
The Graduate.
Well, I wrote, that is a note that I wrote down. This is like the happy ending version of A Graduate, where the two characters who are in love and they're not supposed to be.
The parallels are insane, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, they defy the odds. They run. Well, he runs to the bus. They get in together and they're sitting there going off to their future. The future is uncertain in both movies, but in this case, there's no ambiguity about whether or not they're happy, because they might just have a few seconds before they get blipped or whatever, and he ends up being, a Harvard professor, and she ends up being, Mother Teresa or something. Yeah, or a tree. That's the other thing, is because they don't really answer. Like, they almost treat reincarnation as a person as a negative, whereas you could theoretically go on to live in another planet or something. But I'm wondering if it's possible that you could go back as a better situated human being. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So yeah, it would be weird if she was a tree and he was, a professor or something, but cosmically that's an upgrade from where they were beforehand. I do love the Hall of Past Lives that they get to visit.
Yep. Love it.
Did you catch I remember seeing this in 1991 when she was a bit more in the popular culture. And I remember the theater erupting in laughter when Shirley MacLaine pops on. Did you get that whole reference?
Yeah. Cause okay. I'm a big Rat Pack guy. And she was kind of part of that era, and she popped up on the screen and I was like, yes. And it was kind of funny. All their faces with their jaws dropped. It was coming at some point. You probably didn't know from where or relating to what scene, but it reminds me of when Bowman's going through the Stargate, because Albert Brooks's character Daniel is just like, and I'm like, is this the version of the Stargate? And it reminded me, actually, that scene reminded me a lot of Space Odyssey, and then it kind of brought me back to the Afterlife conundrum, right? And it's very interesting because in Kubrick's film, you could very well be becoming energy, right? And that's the version of the Afterlife, but it's more on the timeline of human evolution rather than a single person's life. And then I started thinking about those parallels, and I'm like, well, yeah, they ride a spaceship, they go into the Stargate, and then you don't really know what happens, and then they come back as energy. And I was like, of course, this movie I find parallels to 2001 in per usual, but that scene kind of sparked that in me. And then you mentioning The Graduate, I'm like, this is it's really interesting how they take this Afterlife and create a story that is so relatable to some of the more, like, I say realistic, and I mean that about Space Odyssey, and that it's very hard science. Mm-hmm. Whereas The Graduate's more just like it's like the literary fiction version of a movie, I guess, where there's no fantasy or sci-fi elements. And it's just marvelous how they take that and make a really human story out of it. But these moments and these parallels are still there. It's just wonderful. The more I think about it, the more I love this movie. And it's kind of funny to me because we had no idea we were going to discuss this last month, and then it just came up, and now here we are.
Yeah, I think I had planned to watch this in May, but then with the Albert Brooks's appearance in Taxi Driver, I was like, oh, we've got this thread going. I don't know if we can keep that going through next month's movie, but I'll see. But yeah, the thing that got me about the Hall of Past Lives is when you hear people talk about reincarnation, usually they're talking about like, oh, I was, Pocahontas, or I was, King Henry VIII or something. What's really cool about this, and especially for something that's 30 years ago and thinking this far, I guess progressively, Albert Brooks in a past life was like an African bushman who's being run down by a lion. There was another guy who was like a 12th century, royalty, like a little girl playing with dollies or something like that. I just love the imagination and the thought and the idea that, yeah, if you're talking about reincarnation, there's been billions of people throughout time. So chances of you being someone notable are very slim. And of course, Meryl Streep was Prince Valiant. That was fun. The one thing I wish that they had done with her character is to give her some kind of a flaw, because she is sort of the prototypical manic pixie dream girl. I know this is 20 years before Zooey Deschanel was a thing, but did that bug you at all that she was a little bit too one-dimensional?
So yeah, it did in a few ways. Number one, I think that even despite how much screen time she has, it wasn't enough for me because I didn't understand what her character was. And you kind of have to accept that she's just this paragon of good. And that's kind of what she becomes because she's staying in this nice hotel. So all the hints are dropped, but at some point you reach a point of diminishing returns there, because I kind of thought at a point, the way that her makeup is done and how she is portrayed as a character, I was like, is she some sort of angel analog? Is she some sort of thing that is from the beyond, but we don't know that? And I was kind of waiting for that twist. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad that wasn't the twist, but I felt like I wasn't necessarily equipped to know exactly what her character was supposed to be. Still loved seeing her on screen. Still think the chemistry with her and Daniel was great. But, I kind of was always in the back of my head, is she a plan by Rip Torn's character to make Daniel look better? Is she acting for some ulterior motive? Because we only get the one flashback scene, which could have easily been recreated by these higher powers or whatever. So it was just, for me, it was, it all still worked. I just wanted a little more. I like when I guess to this point, it kind of devolved into she's just a romantic interest. And I wanted a little more depth to the character. It's not that it's not, implied / inferable. You can still grasp at that, but it's like, it's not spoon fed to you, or it's not all there on screen. A lot of it feels like I'm digging off screen for the details that should have just appeared there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And, to hear you talk about it, I almost wish there was another version of this movie where there was something more going on as far as the cosmic play, because there is a scene where she's like, yeah, my trial is, I'm getting off at, my trial ends at 1 o'clock or something like that. So to Daniel, swing by, you can come see a little bit of my life. And of course he does. The next day he goes into the room, he kind of stands to the back and watches this harrowing, fire rescue, and the judges love her. Both sides of the attorneys love her and all that stuff. And she's just curled up in her chair watching this stuff. Wouldn't that have been interesting if that had been some kind of a setup? Like, yeah, stop by at this exact moment and we're just going to play with your mind or something. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, why wasn't could I go? Is there an alternate reality where I can see the dark version of defending your life?
There may be a deleted scene where Rip Torn is like, hey, invite Daniel to your thing so that he falls more for it, and maybe, I'm not saying that she needed to be the one making the moving the chess pieces, right? But she could have been the queen on the board and somebody else was moving them. And like I said, it's not even that I want that, but I wanted something else. Yeah. And fault of Meryl Streep's whatsoever, still love her performance here. It's, I think, from the story and the narrative, I wanted a little more juice out of that.
Yeah, it's not often that I get to see Meryl Streep do something, light and comedic. I mean, she's done comedy, but this is, just light and bubbly and relatable. That's not, Mamma Mia.
Yeah, maybe she had 3 husbands and she doesn't know which one gave her a daughter, and that's why she is now dead, because they were really mad.
What is that in reference to?
Mamma Mia.
Oh, I see. The thing is, I don't. Oh, that's why I didn't get the joke. I never saw. No, I never saw Mamma Mia, but I did go see the sequel.
So, here we go again.
Which I think was less than that the main plot from the first movie was less important because it was all about one of them having a baby or something.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not a Mamma Mia fan. I don't particularly like the music of ABBA. I think that Mamma Mia is really dumb, and Aaron just hates that I don't like it, and it's like, I know you need to watch it again, but it's literally just this girl doesn't know who her dad is, and her mom's like, well, I got together with 3 dudes so we can narrow it down, and then she invites them all to the island for her wedding to try to decide which one is which,
and there's
to try to discern which one is her father.
Is there even a Maury Povich cameo?
Right? Yeah, Jerry Springer's in it. Ricky Lake, they're all there. And no, it's just, I guess this is way off the beaten path. But when I see a musical that features only the music of a specific band, I want the story of the band. Like, I want Jersey Boys, right? And Mamma Mia is just, let's slap the music of ABBA onto a story. And, people can love it, and it's stupid fun. Get it. It's just not for me. But yeah, it is lighthearted, and Meryl Streep is in it. So there you go.
Yeah, she's great in this movie too. I mean, she's mostly known as a dramatic actress. She's a talent, but yeah, I really wanted to see more of her. It's weird that the supporting female character in this movie has more depth and character potential than the lead actress, because Lena Foster, I keep having to look over because I can't remember her full name.
Lee Grant playing Lena Foster.
Yes, it's very
Lena confusing. Foster playing Lee Grant. What?
No, don't do that to me. No, but she's like the ball busting prosecutor, but there's a lot more going on there, just in the little things that she says, off the cuff, or to Daniel at one point. He gets her alone and he's like, nice out. I really like your outfit or something. And then he said, so how long you been doing this or something? And she says, look, after this is all over, I'll tell you everything you want to know about me, if you still care, or even if you even care. Because she knows that he's kind of trying to butter her up and, make things a little easier on himself. But I really got the idea, and seeing her on a date in a restaurant with someone else, and her companion is kind of checking out Meryl Streep, which seems kind of at odds with this enlightened sense of self that you're supposed to experience in Judgment City. And she was getting a little bit maybe jealous, so that's 2 points of conflict. I'm like, what's going on here? She's really an interesting character, and she's not a villain, much like Rip Torn's, Bob Diamond has a lot of different layers you could peel back in the Noble Defender case situation. Mm-hmm. She's got some great stuff going on as the heavy, but she's not villainous.
Yeah, there's this interesting, this brought up a thought in me, and it may be because of limitations of making movies, back in the 1991 days or even further back, or it just might be a storytelling, evolution thing. But there's a lot of movies, particularly from, the pre-2000 era, where the focus is on, it's 2 main characters. And I guess that's true now too, in romantic comedies and things, as this is not a timeline thing. But I think now, and we've talked about similar ideas before, storytellers are a little more courageous, if you will, in that they're willing to put more stock in a side character, even if it's a small role. Because I think that audiences are smart enough to pick up on those things and say, oh, I'm interested in this character, even though I only saw, 5-6 lines from them. And a good example is Taxi Driver, with like the campaign manager that's hitting on what's her face before Robert De Niro goes to flirt with her. It's like, oh, I'm interested in that guy. And I know I'm not going to see much of him, but like, to invest stock in these characters is a fun and intriguing storytelling technique. that really builds the world out, you know, and there are multiple ways to build a world. You know, you can do these panoramic shots of a setting. You can talk about how the society functions. There's voiceover, you know, there's a million things you can do, but through character, you know, seeing a world through the character's eyes and seeing how other people interact with these smaller characters is a really interesting way to do it. And this movie picks at it a little bit, as you mentioned, but it's not, you know, the pinnacle of that type of storytelling. So we always do this thought exercise, and I'm particularly interested in doing it for this movie. Like, what if it was made today? Maybe we would get all sorts more about the mechanics of the afterlife. And would we even want that is the question. I think we would get it. I don't know whether we would want it or like it.
The only reason I'd want to see a remake or a sequel or anything is just for that Hall of Past Lives, so that whoever is playing the Albert Brooks stand-in would go to see the past life, and there's a chance that, or no, maybe it would even be the Meryl Streep stand-in or a side character to see Albert Brooks in that past life. You know,
I think that would be phenomenal.
It's been 30 years on. It could be anybody who's like, who's this sad sack? I was that guy. That sucks. But you know, there's, as far as the Lena Foster character, the thing that stuck out to me this time is she has to prosecute this case, but it's not that she thinks that Daniel Miller is a bad person. It's almost like she's disappointed. You know, I don't know if she's been on his case or if she's just read his file and seen that he just hasn't progressed over the last 6 times he's been on, you know, on Earth or whatever. But it just seems like, I'm not letting you through. You know, you can make up all the excuses and you can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to me. The object here is to make better people or better forms of intelligence. So this sucks. You haven't learned your lesson and you keep trying to fool everybody, but I can't do this. Yeah,
their enemy is the criteria against which they have to measure people. It's not the people, right? It's not the other lawyers. I think that these quote unquote lawyers are all given a very objective criteria by which to measure people, or like a specific quality, and they're like, just do it. And, you know, this movie in an alternate universe is probably made where Rip Torn is the prosecutor and Lena Foster is the defendant, right? And I really like that kind of, there's lots of hints dropped at that, because like you said, she doesn't really seem that invested in wanting him to lose, but like, she's kind of just laying out the facts as they appear. And she's like, this is what I see. I can't really do anything about it.
And there is a detail that, if I found one fault with the screenplay, it would be that when we first meet Bob and Lena together in that courtroom before the judges come in, they do have a little bit of a rivalry going. Bob's like, "Oh, I heard you lost last Thursday." And they bring that up, I think, one other time, but I never get the feeling that her need to beat him or his need to beat her is important to anything else. It just seems like banter. But given
it's like water cooler talk.
Right. But everything that we come to find out about these characters, it's just like, it's a detail that seems like it was left over from an earlier draft before they realized, oh, this isn't important. These characters don't care about that stuff.
Right. And that's the type of thing where if we had gotten a scene just in his office between those two talking and only those two talking freely, that paints a bigger picture. And I think you're right. You kind of either have to choose to include those details and give us the context, or just not include them at all and let the viewer figure it out. I lean towards give us the context, right? Like, that's not going to ruin this whole afterlife structure. There are still a million questions to be asked. But this is a fun tidbit that wouldn't necessarily throw a wrench in the gears that is your whole inner workings of the afterlife.
Well, especially because in that final scene, and it's a lovely scene where we see, again, Daniel running across that electrified runway, jumping on the bus and prying the door open, and the door won't come open because, you know, for reasons that we find out in a couple of minutes. But the camera zooms out and we're back in the courtroom watching this on a monitor. I remember seeing that when I was 14 and just being blown away, because I don't think I'd seen that particular effect, you know, that telescoping out. But when they decide that Daniel has actually learned his lesson and he can go on, Lena and Bob are just standing there, and there's no like begrudging, like, I guess. They both seem genuinely happy that they were able to help this guy make it work out.
Right. I think they're on his side, right? And that's That's another thing that brings me back to The Good Place. You've only seen 2 episodes, and there is a major twist somewhere within the first 4 seasons, which is all of the seasons, that I'm not going to tell you. I don't want to spoil when it happens either.
It's episode 3. No.
Right. But it's there's kind of these measures by which people are gauged, right? And there's a very clear enemy and ally, one person, or, there's the good place representatives and there's the bad place representatives, and you kind of don't really know what they're looking for as a character, but as a viewer, you do. And it's kind of this irony. And that's what intrigued me about this one is you don't get the system. You just have to accept that, they're kind of all on the side. And I want to know who's on the other side of the characters. Who's the one that's like, yes, give me the bads, or like, send them back. Like that. The problem with this system in terms of if you wanted to make a core villain of the movie is you can't really, because the whole point is if you do bad, you go back. It's not like you're going straight to hell, right? It's, you just go back and back and back, and you might live a harder life. I don't know if eventually you reach a point of no return where you just stop reincarnating and cease to exist. But it's also interesting. It makes the movie an internal conflict almost, instead of, having a core villain.
Well, yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, there is a reference in that earlier scene before the trial, before day 1, where Bob and Daniel are talking about what happens. And I think Bob mentioned something about like, well, eventually if you keep going back, you get like discarded or disposed of or something, which makes me think about your 2001 comment about energy. Like maybe you just, it's that impossible human mind thing to consider. Like what happens if I no longer exist? Forget the idea of heaven and hell, of like your consciousness existing in eternal paradise or eternal damnation. How do you conceive of not being conscious in any, you can't think of it. Like
to try to conceive of that, you have to be conscious. So it is literally impossible to conceive of being not conscious, right? It's wacky. And it's really fun that a 1991 comedy can make us think this stuff while also making us laugh. And, that's joy. It's like from the second this movie starts, I was in, because I was like, this guy's funny. He's got banter. He clearly loves to make other people laugh just day to day, but going back to Soul, he's not trying to make it his job. It's just something he enjoys. And I think that's the glory of this movie is like, and again, The Good Place, it's asking these huge philosophical questions, but packaging them into something that is intensely relatable, which is laughter. And it's something that all humans want. And I think that by establishing the parallel of everybody wants to laugh or make other people laugh, that's like a distinct human need, I think, in many cases. But also everybody wants to know what the F is happening. And by pairing those two things together, you get some really unique and interesting explorations of both, right? You get like, why does this big question make us laugh? Is it because we're uncomfortable and we don't know the answer and we're kind of reveling in that unity of knowing we have no idea what's happening? It's like, is that why people who are really religious get super offended when we joke about their religion? It's like, I don't know, but it's unifying to watch this type of movie and think like, I know Ian's watching this and he doesn't know the answers to these questions, but he's probably laughing at the situations that come from trying to answer them. And that's why I particularly love this movie, and why I kind of realized after watching it, explorations of the human afterlife are just inherently good storytelling fodder. And it's a lot of fun. Another one I'm reminded of that we haven't mentioned is What Dreams May Come, which is a much more serious take. But it's also a very interesting movie. And it grapples with those questions in a way that I think is more visually appealing, but is not as comedically appealing.
I got to watch that movie again. I've not watched it since it came out 23 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't watched it since high school.
I remember being visually pretty blown away, but just let down by the story. But that might just be because I might just appreciate it more now with some more life experience and perspective.
Yeah, there's sorry to interrupt, but there's another Robin Williams film that I think it's not quite the afterlife, but it grapples with death in a very compelling way. And also
don't say Patch Adams. Don't say Patch Adams.
I don't even know what that is. I was going to say World's Greatest Dad.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
So that movie hits me hard. I was watching it with my roommate at one point, probably 5-6 years ago. And she just threw it on, and I didn't know what it was. And I started watching it. And by the end, you know, I'm bawling, I'm laughing. I'm like, I don't know what to feel, but there's something uniquely interesting and compelling, and it kind of glues your eyes to the screen when people can deftly mix death/philosophical human questions with comedy. And it's wonderful to see it on screen in such a lighthearted way and defending your life. But then going to watch something like World's Greatest Dad, it makes you sad, but in a way that is thoughtful and caring about your feelings, right? It's not like that. It's not just in it for a laugh. We want you to feel something and learn something about yourself from this movie, while you gain maybe a few laughs here and there. So I like this genre, and it's something that I never realized until today, having watched this. Obviously I liked The Good Place, but it's just like, where else can this go is the question I ask myself. And it's like, anywhere. You can do almost anything with these types of narratives. And that's super intriguing to me.
Well, you know, I totally agree. A couple of things I want to get in here as we wrap up. First of all, there's something, you know, maybe there is a book on this, or a documentary, or at least one that's waiting to be written or filmed. Why comedians are so good at making art that speaks, you know, not just to our funny bones, but to our hearts and the human experience. I don't know if you're familiar with Bobcat Goldthwait. He was a comic.
I know the name.
He was a comic and a comic actor back in the 80s. He was in the Police Academy movies and a bunch of stuff. He had a really weird kind of affected, you know, kind of voice. He did World's Greatest Dad. Just like Albert Brooks made, you know, Defending Your Life, but these are comic actors. To watch the work that they kind of became famous for, you think, really? What do they know about the human condition?
Mm-hmm.
Turns out a lot. The other thing I wanted to mention, two other Albert Brooks movies I can recommend since you're a fan of this. One is called Real Life, which is it's like the genesis of reality television, but in a movie. And then another one is called Lost in America, where he plays a guy who's going through I haven't seen it in years. So I think it's like a midlife crisis, and he jumps in an RV with his wife to go across the country. And his wife is played by Julie Haggerty, who played Elaine in Airplane. So if you can imagine those two on a road trip together,
yep.
Wackiness ensues. So yeah, that's Defending Your Life. I feel like we've covered a lot today.
Yeah, this is I obviously love all our chats, but this has been one of my favorites recently. Just because it's one of those movies that it just makes you think, and the more you think about it, the more thoughts you have. It's like a domino effect. But speaking of movies that had an impact, that is not a piece that I wrote, but one of my good friends at The Quill to Live, his name is Alex. He's one of the main reviewers there. He just wrote a piece about Mad Max Fury Road. We're doing a monthly series where we try to dive into a different piece of media other than books and talk about how it impacts our reading. And this piece is just downright phenomenal. He talks about how watching Mad Max Fury Road twice completely changed how he reads books, because now after watching that film, he reads books through a very critical lens and appreciates when a book builds a world without holding his hand and just explaining everything to him, which obviously Mad Max does very well in the movie. And it's a fascinating piece. He mentions the word sexual awakening at one point, which is something that's hilarious. But it's really good. It's an interesting take on how one piece of media can just shape the way you view everything else. So if people are interested, I highly encourage you to head to thequilltolive.com and read that phenomenal piece.
Well, you won't have to go very far, because I'm gonna link that in the description below.
Excellent. So and Alex, right I was talking to him recently. Very analytical mind, very smart dude, and he is most definitely interested sometime in collaborating with us if you'd be willing to have him. Yeah. It's funny. I find a lot of similarities between you guys, just because I really admire how you both take a lens and you analyze movies and media. And it's something that I've tried to emulate in my reviews and say, what do I feel about this and why? You know, it's how am I looking at this film and how does that influence my viewing of it? So I think that getting him on the air sometime would be phenomenal, maybe for a page to screen in the future.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll figure something out. I love that idea.
Perfect.
Well, thank you again, man. Next month is going to be very different.
Is it another mafia movie?
No. It is going to be Aliens. The sequel.
Multiple Aliens. Ooh.
Yeah, the sequel to Alien, which we talked about a couple of years ago. And, you know, it's one of those movies that, and I don't want to overhype it too. I don't know if you can overhype Aliens too much, but, you know, you think about a sci-fi classic like Ridley Scott's Alien, and then you think, okay, 8 years later, we're going to make a sequel. That sounds like a terrible idea.
I don't know if I've ever thought that, but okay.
Well, I certainly wondered, but
I'm excited either way.
Well, it's one of those films where, you know, Alien was a landmark film in the genre, and Aliens did the same thing. It's like the perfect trick. So we'll talk about that next month. There's not any deep ponderances about the afterlife or human existence. Maybe about corporations messing around with, you know, bioengineering.
Oh, that I can't
living
wait.
Weapons, but you know, that's a whole other chat.
Anyway, anti-capitalist Cole will come out to play.
And Cap Cole. There's your wait, that's an anarcho-capitalist. I don't know. But anyway, thanks a lot, Cole Rush, The Quill to Live. I'll have a link to your stuff and also Alex's piece down below. Thank you much, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you next month, whenever that is.
Whatever that is.
Well, that'll be next month.
And it's going to be Aliens.
So it'll be right here. So
yes.
All right. I'll catch you later. Thanks for having me as always.
As always, take care.